What if peace was not something you found, but something you trained? Think Like a Monk reveals how to calm your mind, let go of negativity, and live with purpose in a noisy world. Welcome to English Bookshelf. Imagine living a life where your mind is calm even when the world is loud, where other people's opinions don't control your mood, where success doesn't exhaust you and failure doesn't define you. Imagine waking up each day with clarity instead of chaos, purpose instead of pressure, peace instead of panic. This is not a fantasy. This is a skill, and this book exists to teach you that skill. Think Like a Monk is not about becoming a monk. It is about learning how monks think, so you can live better, deeper, and more intentionally in the modern world. Jay Shetty begins this journey by telling us something most of us never question. Your mind is not broken. It is simply untrained. We are taught how to earn, how to compete, how to impress. But no one teaches us how to handle our thoughts. So we react instead of responding. We chase instead of choosing. We consume instead of creating. Jay's story begins far away from social media fame and success. It begins with confusion. Like many young people, he was chasing a version of success handed to him by society. A good job, status, approval. But the closer he got, the emptier he felt. That emptiness led him to an unexpected place, a monastery. And there, in silence, discipline, and simplicity, he discovered something life-changing. Happiness is not found by adding more. It is found by removing what doesn't matter. Monks don't escape the world because they are weak. They step away to understand it clearly. Jay explains that monks train the mind the way athletes train the body. With repetition, with discipline, with intention. They don't wait for motivation. They build systems. And the first system they build is awareness. Most people live unconsciously. They scroll without thinking, react without pausing, judge without understanding. A monk watches the mind, because once you observe your thoughts, you stop being controlled by them. The book introduces a powerful idea early on. You are not your thoughts. Thoughts appear. They pass. But you are the one watching. This single shift creates space. And in that space, freedom begins. Jay talks about fear, not as an enemy, but as a teacher. Fear showed you where your attachments are, where your ego lives, where your insecurity hides. Monks don't suppress fear. They study it, because fear loses power when it is understood. The book gently exposes how much of our life is driven by comparison. We compare careers, relationships, bodies, lifestyles. Comparison, Jay says, is the thief of peace. A monk does not compete with others. A monk competes with yesterday's self. Not to win, but to grow. This is where Think Like a Monk begins to feel deeply personal. It doesn't judge you. It doesn't preach. It simply asks, why are you chasing what doesn't fulfill you? Why are you listening to voices that don't know your path? Why are you so busy proving your worth instead of living it? Jay explains that clarity comes from values, not goals. Goals change, trends fade, but values anchor you. When you know what you stand for, decisions become easier. When you know what matters, distractions lose power. Monks design their life around values. That is why their days feel purposeful, even when they seem simple. The book reminds us that simplicity is not emptiness. It is focus. And focus is rare in a world addicted to noise. As this journey begins, you realize something quietly unsettling. You don't need a new life. You need a new lens. And that lens is mindfulness. Mindfulness is not sitting silently for hours. It is being fully present with whatever you are doing. Eating without distraction. Listening without planning a reply. Living without constantly escaping the moment. Jay explains that presence is the foundation of peace. Without it, even success feels hollow. This is only the beginning. As the journey continues, Jay Shetty takes us deeper into the one thing that silently shapes every decision we make, the mind's clutter. He explains that most of our stress is not caused by life itself, but by the unnecessary thoughts we keep replaying, regret about the past, anxiety about the future, imaginary conversations, endless self-judgment. Monks call this mental noise, and before you can build peace, you must learn how to clear it. Jay introduces the idea of letting go, not as loss, but as relief. We hold on to anger because it makes us feel powerful. We hold on to jealousy because it makes us feel relevant. We hold on to resentment because it justifies our pain. But every emotion we cling to occupies space in the mind, and the mind, like a room, can only hold so much. Monks learn to ask a simple question whenever a thought appears. Does this serve me? If the answer is no, they don't argue with the thought. They don't fight it. They let it pass. Jay explains that suppression creates pressure. Awareness creates release. This is why meditation is not about stopping thoughts. It is about changing your relationship with them. You notice. You acknowledge. You release. Slowly, the mind becomes lighter. The book then turns to something most people misunderstand: ego. Jay says the ego is not confidence. Ego is insecurity wearing a mask. It is the voice that says, prove yourself, defend yourself, compare yourself. Ego wants attention. Ego wants validation. Ego wants to be right. Monks don't destroy the ego. They see through it. Because once you stop identifying with the ego, criticism loses its sting, and praise loses its grip. Jay shares that monks measure success differently. Not by applause, not by achievement, but by alignment. Are your actions aligned with your values? Are your words aligned with your intentions? Is your life aligned with who you truly want to be? If the answer is yes, outer noise becomes irrelevant. The book speaks deeply about negativity. Jay explains that negativity spreads faster than positivity because the mind is wired for survival. We remember insults more than compliments, failures more than progress. Monks train the mind to rebalance this bias, not by pretending everything is good, but by choosing what deserves attention. Energy flows where attention goes. If you constantly focus on what's wrong, your life begins to feel wrong. Jay encourages a powerful daily practice. Observe what drains you and what nourishes you. Some people energize you. Some conversations inspire you. Some habits ground you. And some things quietly exhaust your soul. A monk chooses nourishment over stimulation. This is where discipline enters the picture. Not harsh discipline. Gentle discipline. Jay explains that monks don't rely on motivation. Motivation is temporary. Discipline is dependable. They design routines that support peace. Waking early, moving the body, feeding the mind with wisdom before feeding it with noise. These habits are not rigid rules. They are acts of self-respect. The book reminds us that self-care is not indulgence. It is preparation. You cannot give calm if you are constantly chaotic. Jay then talks about identity. Most of us define ourselves by roles, job titles, relationships, achievements. When these change, we feel lost. Monks define themselves by values. When roles fall away, values remain. This is why monks feel stable even in uncertainty. Jay invites the listener to question their labels. Who are you without your job? Who are you without your success? Who are you without other people's opinions? At first, this feels frightening, but then it feels freeing, because beneath all labels, there is awareness, and awareness is untouched by success or failure. As this part of the journey ends, one truth becomes clear. Peace is not something you find. It is something you practice. Every day. In small moments. With patience. As the silence of the mind begins to settle, Jay Shetty turns our attention toward a question that almost everyone asks, but very few truly answer. Why am I here? Not in a dramatic, philosophical way, but in a practical, everyday sense. What am I meant to do with this life? Jay explains that most people search for purpose the wrong way. They look outward instead of inward. They chase careers, titles, money, recognition, hoping purpose will appear once they make it. But monks don't search for purpose in achievement. They discover it in alignment. Jay introduces the idea of dharma not as a religious concept, but as a personal truth. Dharma is the combination of what you are good at, what you love, and what helps others. Purpose is not about what sounds impressive. It is about what feels right. Monks believe that every person has a unique contribution to make. Not better, not worse, just different. The problem is that comparison buries purpose. When you constantly look at others' paths, you lose clarity about your own. Jay explains that clarity comes from silence, from removing noise, from creating space to listen to yourself. Most people don't lack talent. They lack direction. And direction comes from values. The book gently guides us to ask deeper questions. What energizes me even when it's hard? What problems do I care about without being paid? What would I do if no one was watching? These answers are not loud. They whisper. That's why you need stillness to hear them. Jay shares that monks train themselves to serve without attachment to outcomes. They don't serve to be thanked. They don't give to be remembered. Service is not a transaction. It is an expression. This changes everything. When you work only for results, failure feels personal. Success feels fragile. But when you work from service, effort itself feels meaningful. The book explains that happiness is not found in self-obsession. It is found in self-transcendence. The happiest people are not those who think about themselves all day. They are those who forget themselves while helping others. Jay then moves into relationships. He explains that love is not possession. It is presence. Most relationships fail not because of lack of love, but because of lack of awareness. We listen to respond, not to understand. We love to receive, not to give. We attach instead of connecting. Monks practice detachment, which Jay carefully explains. Detachment does not mean not caring. It means caring without clinging. It means loving without fear of loss. Giving without expectation. Being present without trying to control. This kind of love feels lighter, healthier, more honest. Jay explains that attachment comes from fear. Detachment comes from trust. When you trust yourself, you don't need to control others. The book also talks about pain, not as something to avoid, but as something to learn from. Pain, Jay says, is inevitable. Suffering is optional. Pain becomes suffering when we resist it, deny it, or define ourselves by it. Monks sit with discomfort. They observe it. They let it pass. And in doing so, they discover resilience. This is where the book becomes deeply empowering. You realize that peace is not the absence of difficulty. It is the ability to remain grounded within it. Jay reminds us that modern life trains us to distract ourselves at the first sign of discomfort. Phones, entertainment, busyness. But distraction delays healing. Stillness accelerates it. As this part of the journey unfolds, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. A calm mind gives clarity. Clarity reveals purpose. Purpose finds meaning through service. This is the monk's path. Not withdrawal from the world, but engagement with it consciously. And now, as the foundation is set, the book moves toward its most practical and transformative teachings. How to build habits that protect peace. How to love without losing yourself. How to succeed without burning out. How to live in the world without being consumed by it. That is where the journey leads next. Now the journey moves from understanding to application. Because wisdom that stays in the mind but never enters daily life is just information. Jay Shetty makes it clear that monks don't wait for perfect conditions to practice peace. They build systems that protect it. He begins talking about habits not as rigid routines, but as intentional choices repeated with care. Most people let their days design them. Monks design their days first. Jay explains that the way you start your morning decides the quality of your thoughts. And the quality of your thoughts decides the quality of your life. If your day begins with noise, comparison, and urgency, your mind stays restless. Monks begin with grounding, silence before stimulation, reflection before reaction, intention before information. Jay encourages creating a morning ritual that belongs to you, not copied, not forced, aligned. It could be meditation, movement, prayer, writing, breathing. The action matters less than the awareness, because the purpose is not productivity. The purpose is presence. The book then talks about discipline, and Jay reframes it beautifully. Discipline is not punishment. Discipline is self-love in action. When you choose discipline, you are choosing your future over your comfort. Not because comfort is wrong, but because excess comfort weakens the mind. Monks train the mind the way athletes train the body. Consistently, patiently, without drama. Jay explains that motivation comes and goes, but systems stay. This is why monks don't ask, "Do I feel like it?" They ask, "Is this aligned with who I want to be?" That single shift removes internal negotiation. The book then moves into something deeply relevant to modern life: success without burnout. Jay says most people chase success at the cost of peace, then spend their peace trying to enjoy success. Monks reverse this. They protect peace first and let success flow from clarity. Jay explains that ambition is not the problem. Attachment is. You can aim high without tying your worth to outcomes. You can work hard without losing yourself. You can fail without feeling broken. This is the power of detachment. Detachment doesn't reduce effort. It reduces suffering. When you detach from outcomes, you give your best without fear. And fear, more than failure, is what limits us. Jay then talks about relationships in a distracted world. He says presence is the greatest gift you can give another human being. Not advice, not fixing, not impressing. Presence. Listening without interrupting. Being there without checking your phone. Seeing someone without trying to change them. Monks practice conscious connection. They don't multitask relationships. They honor them. Jay explains that conflict often arises not from disagreement, but from unhealed ego. We react when our identity feels threatened. We defend when we feel unseen. We attack when we feel powerless. Awareness interrupts this cycle. When you pause before reacting, you regain control. This is where mindfulness becomes practical. Mindfulness is not sitting cross-legged for hours. It is pausing before you speak, breathing before you reply, choosing calm over control. Jay shares that monks don't aim to eliminate emotions. They aim to understand them. Anger is information. Jealousy is information. Fear is information. Once understood, emotion no longer controls action. The book then turns toward fear of failure. Jay says failure hurts more when your identity is fragile. When you define yourself by success, failure feels like death. When you define yourself by values, failure feels like feedback. Monks detach from identity labels. They see life as practice. Every experience is training. Every mistake is learning. Every setback is refinement. This mindset creates resilience. You stop fearing the fall because you trust your ability to stand again. As this part of the journey unfolds, a powerful realization emerges. Peace is not passive. It is active. It requires daily choices, small acts of courage, consistent awareness. And now, the book moves toward its final and most profound teaching: how to live fully in an uncertain world, how to accept impermanence without fear, how to love deeply without attachment, how to face change with grace. Because everything changes, and resisting change is the root of suffering As the journey comes to its final moments, Jay Shetty invites us to face the one truth that no amount of success, money, or preparation can escape. Everything changes. People change. Circumstances change. Dreams evolve. Life moves forward whether we are ready or not. Most of our suffering, Jay explains, comes from resisting this truth. We cling to people. We cling to outcomes. We cling to identities. And when life inevitably shifts, we feel betrayed. Monks are trained for impermanence. Not because they don't care, but because they understand that attachment creates fear. Jay explains that when you expect things to last forever, you live in constant anxiety. But when you accept change as natural, you live with gratitude instead of fear. Presence becomes more precious. When you know nothing is permanent, this awareness doesn't make life cold. It makes it meaningful. Jay talks about loss not as something to avoid, but as something that deepens wisdom. Loss teaches humility. It teaches perspective. It teaches appreciation. A monk does not ask, "Why did this happen to me?" A monk asks, "What is this teaching me?" This shift transforms pain into growth. The book gently reminds us that peace is not found in control. It is found in trust. Trust in your values. Trust in your preparation. Trust in your ability to respond no matter what life brings. When you stop trying to control everything, you stop exhausting yourself. Jay then brings the journey full circle, back to the mind. He reminds us that the mind will always produce thoughts, some helpful, some harmful. But now, you know how to choose. You know how to observe without reacting. You know how to pause before responding. You know how to detach without becoming distant. You have learned how monks think, not to escape the world, but to live in it with clarity. The book ends with a quiet but powerful realization. You don't need to leave your life behind to live wisely. You don't need to renounce ambition to find peace. You don't need to become someone else. You simply need to become more intentional. Intentional with your time. Intentional with your thoughts. Intentional with your energy. Intentional with your relationships. Jay reminds us that your attention is your most valuable resource. Where you place it, your life follows. When you choose growth over ego, service over status, presence over pressure, you naturally begin to live like a monk. Not in appearance, but in mindset. And that is the heart of this book. Think like a monk is not about perfection. It is about practice. Not about escaping pain, but about understanding it. Not about silencing the world, but about quieting the mind. You don't wake up one day fully enlightened. You wake up each day willing to train your mind again. With patience, with compassion, with courage, and slowly, without forcing it. Your life begins to feel lighter. Not because problems disappear, but because you no longer carry them alone. You become calm without being passive, ambitious without being anxious, focused without being rigid. You live fully, yet peacefully. This is the monk's wisdom, not hidden in a monastery, but available to anyone, willing to slow down, reflect, and choose consciously. And that is the true message of this journey. A calm mind is not a gift. It is a practice. If this journey inspired you, subscribe to English Bookshelf, where every book teaches you how to live better.